One of the questions I frequently get asked, all the time, from people writing in, is how do I compare Panama to living in Costa Rica or Ecuador or Belize or Mexico or one place or another? And, that's really very difficult to answer accurately because I haven't lived in all those countries. But it's true for everyone. When this kind of question is asked, and it's frequently asked, you're going to get a personal response 99 out of 100 times. So if the person you're talking to has had a good experience, wow, it sounds great. If they've had a bad experience, oh, it sounds terrible. You're talking about one person and their experience in a nation. I've been all over the world for 50 years working and living, and I can assure you I heard some incredible stories about the United States of America, where I come from originally. And I just sit there and go, good Lord, where do these people live? They seem to have had such a terrible experience. Well, it happens sometimes. And of course, there are others that had a wonderful time. But the point is that it's all individual personal stories. And they can be useful, and they're good to hear. You pick up a little detail here and there. But they don't really give you a full view of a nation. And you end up looking at the trees so carefully you don't see the forest as a whole. And that's very important to do that. And as an analyst, you have to step back and see that forest. You can't judge a nation on the basis of your own personal experience, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. You do have to look at the total picture. One group that does that just automatically, without even thinking about it, are people from other Latin American nations. I mean, they speak the language. They understand the culture. They're not having to get used to a lot of things that people from North America, Europe, and Asia have to get used to when they arrive. They don't come here because of the beautiful beaches. They have their own. And they don't come here because the mountain view is so dramatic. They have their own mountains. They don't come here for the beautiful Mayan ruins. We don't have any in Panama. So they come here for other reasons, and they have a good, at least a reasonable sense of what Panama is like in comparison to other Latin American nations, because they've heard about them, they've known them, they've frequently traveled to these countries over the years. They may have gone to school there, they may have friends there, and so forth. They have a much fuller view. And they come to Panama because it's a stable society. They feel secure here. It's a democracy. There's no military, so nobody banging in your door at 3 a.m., some coup d'etat or whatever. A nation that they can come and visit, and they're not harassed in immigration because of the country they come from, or treated with suspicion as if they're a criminal or something else. They're just treated like everybody else. And as tourists here, this is true of everybody. It would be true of you. They can actually, if they want, they can set up a business and set up a corporation. They can actually do business here without anything more than a tourist visa. But it does require that they leave the country and return from time to time to maintain a tourist status. Now, that's not a particularly good thing. That's why most of us do go for residency, and for that permanent residency, as it's called. Because at that point, we are officially treated as if we were citizens here, but we aren't. We can't vote, we can't hold office, we can't be involved in the political life of the country. That's in any direct sense at all. And most of us don't want to be anyhow, so that's perfectly okay. But everything else we're allowed to take part in, just as the citizens of Panama are allowed. And it's a sense of commitment to the country that's appreciated by people who live here. You're not just a tourist here, whether it's for 6 months or 6 years as a tourist or back and forth. You actually live here. You're part of their society, and they can appreciate that commitment on your part. So that's the general habit, and they can attain this position here, that level residency visa, much more easily than they can in many other countries. In other words, it's a more welcoming society in that regard than many others. So we have far more people relocating to Panama than we do Panamanians relocating to other countries. You don't have to worry about statistics; are rather overwhelming in that one. Although Panamanians do work elsewhere, but they don't go up to the United States, for example, to work in somebody's restaurant or whatever. They go up typically for education or for a regular job. Illegal immigration to the U.S. from Panama is negligible, if very little, if any. Why? The economic situation down here is a lot better anyhow, always has been. Now, that's not the right attitude. They'll go up for good reasons and come back later with the skills and the education they've gained, and which they paid for, and use it down here, which is wonderful. It works pretty very well. So an outsider in Latin America 10, 20, 30 years ago, they wouldn't have thought about Panama. There were a lot of problems here. They had a difficult reputation at times. I mean, there's a lot of history that wasn't very nice, and true of pretty much all Latin American nations. So most folks in Latin America, if they wanted to go somewhere for the sake of security, frankly, they went to the U.S. and some went to Canada. Otherwise, there wasn't a lot of choice in their own region where they felt that there was something they could depend on over the long haul. Well, Panama has, in the last decade particularly, taken that position. And because the people here wanted it that way, we've been through 3 administrations here, led by 3 men, each with a very different personality, a different approach, can be quite critical of each other, to put it gently, very active democracy. But all 3 of them dedicated to the economic advancement of the country. So whatever it is that one started in the beginning, the others have continued when it comes to economic growth. I've often said that the one thing that we really bring people to the streets here, which doesn't happen, we don't have rioting mobs or anything of that sort, the one that would be the president who was stupid enough to break up this economic growth, and no one is going to do that. They're very dedicated as a society to it. The people are well aware of it, and they want it, and they want more of it, and they happen to be very pleased with that. If they have a criticism, it's usually because they think the government's moving too slowly, not that it's moving too quickly. So all of this is very impressive to people who are coming out of countries with serious problems. In addition, we have a much more diverse economy than you might imagine. It's not just the Panama Canal. There's a great deal more going on here than that. And a critical factor was 2009, when the bottom fell out of economies all over the world, where throughout the Western Hemisphere, from Canada to Argentina, they fell into negative growth. They lost. They fell backwards, and true of Europe as well. In Panama, we kept right on growing. And we went through that period without any significant damage at all. It was wonderful. It was a great test of the system. What we've developed, or I should say I think the Panamanian people have developed down here, is an economy that sailed through that extreme period that was all but almost disastrous, and it came very close to it, in so many countries that prided themselves on their wisdom and their financial competency. Well, we discovered that Panama did extremely well throughout it all, and it's continued to. Its growth rates are very, very, very positive. Just yesterday, we heard that the foreign direct investment, that's major sums of money being put, usually by businesses, of course, into a nation from outside, foreign investment, is up 17% from the year before, which was a record. From the year before, which was a record from the year before that. So money coming in to the country, people don't invest their money someplace where they think it could all fall apart next week or next year or even 2 or 3 years from now. They're looking for stability, and they find it here. And that, so when you see the money flowing into a nation from foreign sources, Latin American, European, North American predominantly, then you know they're impressed, and they're taking it very seriously because it's their money. So just as you would take it very seriously, I mean, it's your money that you're putting into it. Well, they're putting in a lot more, and so they're very sensitive to it. So we have people coming in also from all over. It's not just from, say, Venezuela, which has been a major contributor recently because the situation there is absolutely desperate and getting worse. Almost impossible to believe, but it's in an extremely delicate position now. We truly wish them the very best, and we hope they get through it. But we've had them up, we had Colombians up in years past when the cartels were a bigger problem. So people have come to flee, but it's not just folks like that. There are folks from other societies that are just stagnant. Or, as is true right now in many Latin American societies, they are dependent on a natural resource, oil, copper, tin, one or another. and for the bulk of their income. So when prices take a hit, they take a hit. Everything in their country takes a hit. And this is exactly what's been going on the last couple of years and continues to go on as I speak today. The loss in oil prices here, or oil profits, has been dramatic, and its impact has been felt in Venezuela, obviously, but in Ecuador, in Colombia. These are also Brazil. These are major oil-producing nations, but also other natural resources like copper and tin, Bolivia, Chile, Peru. These nations have all been suffering. Mexico is suffering too from the low prices for these sorts of natural resources. So many of these countries are dependent on one or two of these natural resources for the bulk of their income. We are not. None of them, as a matter of fact. Now, we do have a copper mine under construction in a rather distant sort of isolated part of the country, but it's got a couple, 3 more years before they're finished building it. It's making no really major contribution to the economy at the moment, other than providing about 5,000 jobs to Panamanians who are working over there helping build it. So here we have this gigantic copper mine, but it is the fall in the price of copper has meant nothing because they aren't producing any yet, so it hasn't impacted us. We're benefiting from this, and our gasoline prices are lower as a result, and we're delighted with that. And we just had some Canadian guests by, and they were quite impressed by the price of gasoline here. Well, it depends on where you come from, but nonetheless, we're doing fine in that regard. We've saved a lot of money, and likewise with all the other natural resources that we need in manufacturing, which is a major factor here in Panama, although many people aren't aware of that, and other areas. So the very things that are causing a great deal of grief, even tragedy in some instances, in other Latin American nations are not impacting us. So whether times are good, globally, or regionally, or whether times are bad, Panama grows through that. And this is incredibly important to folks. This has drawn so many people into the country. And now we see a growing wave of people from Europe. We have many more flights from Europe than we've had in the past. But it's not flights, it's not planes. You have to have people in the planes to make a difference. You can't sell the seats, you're not going to keep the flight. Well, the number of flights is increasing, and people are coming out for tourist reasons, but also to gain permanent residency too, since many of their nations are going through very difficult times. I think one of the most surprising was Italians. Now, there is not yet, at least, someday, no direct flight at the moment from Rome to Panama City. I think Alitalia may not just have the financial means right at the moment to open that, because many other cities you can fly directly. But Italians have to go via some other European capital in order to get down here to Panama City. So you wouldn't expect a lot of them coming down. But they are, and they're ever increasing numbers. And when statistics were released last year on people gaining permanent residency visas here in Panama by nationality, it came as quite a surprise to a lot of people to find that nearly twice as many Italians had received those permissions, those visas, in that first half of 2015 than Americans. More Spaniards than Americans. Spaniards and Italians together, over 4 times as many have received residency visas than is true of Americans. And the Americans used to be, after Colombians, the second largest group in the country. Now they're number 5. So we have, and Portugal is the 8th most common nationality now gaining a permanent visa, permanent residency here. And Portugal is not a Spanish-speaking country, of course, it's Portuguese-speaking, although probably these are people in business and so on who've learned Spanish because they've had to work with people, their counterparts in Spain. Whatever, they are now the 8th most common. 10 years ago, no European nation managed to make it into the top 12. We have a lot of statistics here that people I work with have put together over the years. No European nation was anywhere near being in the top 12. Now we have Spain number 3 and Italy number 4 and Portugal number 8. It's really very, very interesting. So when my answer often to this question is when the money is coming this direction from people who take these things very seriously and have the resources to really investigate a country very carefully, and are old hands at doing it. They've been in business for 60 years. They've been doing it for 60 years. and then others, people who themselves are coming in without any specific reason that would make them different than anybody else. They're coming here, all the money and the people, for the same reason. That says more to me as an analyst than whatever somebody selling real estate in Ecuador and Mexico has to say about it. These countries are great countries, don't get me wrong. They all have wonderful people in them. I've had an opportunity to work in a number of them. I think very highly of them. But they have problems. And they have problems that we don't have. Their people know that. So do the other people who live in neighboring nations. When they pick a place to come in Latin America, here they come. And we've seen large numbers of them coming in over the years. And now from Europe, as before, from North America, and continue to come down from the U.S. and Canada. They haven't stopped. It's just the others have joined them. So in money and people, they vote with their feet, they vote with their wallet, so to speak, by coming here. It's a vote of confidence in Panama, one that Panama had to earn. You don't just get this because you've been good for a year or two. They've earned it over more than a decade now of consistent, above-average economic growth, and by maintaining this open and fair attitude toward all comers that they're famous for, they're welcoming, and as a result of that have benefited hugely by the arrival of people who've been able to bring their skills to the country, as well, of course, as their money, which has made it possible for us to have one of the most rapidly growing infrastructures in the region and all of Latin America now. It's fascinating to watch it unfold. It's very, very encouraging. So when people ask me that, I want to say that, it's hard to summarize it quickly, and it's usually statistical, and it's boring and dull, and nobody really wants to hear about those things. But you follow the people, follow the money, and you see which of the nations that are being presented out there for relocation for you is convince other people it's the best place to go. People who have the knowledge, have the background to make a judgment much more easily and much more accurately than you can hope to do sitting at a computer monitor somewhere in Toronto or in Glasgow or, who knows, Los Angeles, another place. So that's why I think Panama compares well to other nations. But it doesn't mean that you can't find a good home in any one of these other nations. And if they really catch your eye and you're really fascinated, by all means, we're not in competition. We're doing fine. And if you chose not to come, it's not going to hurt my feelings. It makes no difference to me. But the only thing that makes a difference is if you go where you need to go. All I can tell you is that for a lot of folks, this is the place they need to go when they need to go. So when you make your decision, look at all the possibilities that really catch your attention. But keep in mind that you want to feel comfortable that you're in line with other people who are arriving in, that you're really into something that's not just good for the year or two, but for the long term. Because we don't just come down here for a few months if we're getting visas to be residents here. So I think that's probably the best answer I can give, even though it's unsatisfactory to others. But I will not badmouth, as they say in English, badmouth other nations, tell them what terrible places they are, because they're not. They may be going through difficult periods. They may have difficult leadership or lack thereof. Any leadership, there are all sorts of problems out there, and there are others that are doing reasonably well given the circumstances they're working under, and whose people and whose climates and whose housing are wonderful. And if that's where you need to be, by all means go there. And don't worry about us, we'll be okay. But if you want me to compare Panama to others, it's not my personal opinion alone. My personal opinion is definitely this is a place to be, but that's me. I would just simply bring to your attention the fact that large numbers of people with a lot at stake have made the decision to come to Panama. So maybe at least it's worth your consideration. And it's also worth remembering what a fantastic job the Panamanian people have done over the last decade in adjusting to this sudden dramatic growth. I have a huge confidence in the people who live here. They have their democracies, they have their squabbling, they have their disagreements all the time. But they come together. They do work together when they need to, and they're moving their country ahead. And I just find that incredibly useful. And as one final note, I realized I'm wearing a red shirt. I normally don't. Okay, let's see. You see it? All righty. This is my shirt for our national soccer team, football team, the Maria Roja, the Red Tide. And so I give a salute to our favorite football team and to all of you who've joined us today. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.